Hi, I'm Paul Duchesne, and welcome to Mama Paul's Story. I've been doing news stories, and I just did a little segment where I introduced the fact that I may do some of these other life stories about Organic Twinkie Project, AT&T, and Whole Foods. And for this little segment, I want to talk about the other kinds of stories that I want to do, and they've got to do with these, basically the history that we're involved in. If we don't know how we got to where we're going, we're not going to figure out how to figure out or solve the problem we've got that we're in right now. So knowing your history is sort of pretty helpful. What I've got on the right here is a little board I put together, and it's got basically my life from 1944 up till starts in 1944 and goes all the way up to the current time. And it starts with Roosevelt and Truman. And I was actually, interestingly, I remember clearly, I was 4.5 years old. I don't know how I remember this, but I was 4.5 years old, and I remember listening to the election in bed that night on the radio, the Dewey-Truman election. And Dewey was going to win the election. They thought that Truman was going to lose. And they even had the headlines in the newspaper were already printed that night before. Well, it turns out that Truman won the election, so boom, they were wrong on that one. And Truman's presidency, he seemed like sort of a nice guy that hung out and sang songs on the piano with his daughter, but there were some insidious things going on there in terms of our foreign policy and the beginnings of the CIA. And there's an amazing book called The Devil's Chessboard, which I'll use as a kickoff point, which if you haven't seen the book, you might want to move the Dulles brothers into the traitor category when you realize the history of how we got to where we are today. So anyway, the history book, looking at this, we're going to just see ourselves going through the periods through Eisenhower, Kennedy, Johnson, Nixon, through the 60s there. And the 60s is the most interesting period of time, leading us out of the 70s into the period of 80s, the period of deregulation and Ronald Reagan, up to the current era we're in right now, where Trump is the president. So I'm going to get rid of this board, and the 60s were incredibly interesting, volatile, and we're still being called upon to fix what we did back then. But the other board is the 50-year board, which just focuses on 1970 to the current time. And the point of this board here is this is the 50 years since the Powell Memo was written. The Powell Memo was written around 1970-71. And the Powell Memo is got to be one of the most influential documents that is affecting us today. The Powell Memo is pretty much responsible for the evisceration of critical thinking in the universities. It's responsible for the right-wing think tanks that have proliferated. It's pretty much responsible for a lot of the philosophy that we're living today. The greed is good philosophy comes out of it. And ultimately, the creation of Fox News. Fair and Balance is actually mentioned on page 3 or page 5 of the Powell Memo. One of the most influential documents that's affecting us 50 years later, and basically the Powell Memo, you can trace it right up to Donald Trump. It's just absolutely frightening, the effects of some of these things that we're not that fully aware of. So I'm going to take that one down, and we're going to look at the other one, which will keep me doing it so it doesn't look so weird. This is Capitalism and Democracy, and this is the biggest one actually where I started with, and I have two little things on there on the end there. You can see slavery and the first factories in Adam Smith. Well, prior to Black Lives Matter, I had been reading Adam Smith for years and was a huge fan of Adam Smith. And there was a part of Adam Smith that I sort of was slightly aware of but didn't look into deeply and sort of buried in my subconscious. When the Black Lives Matter movement started, I started to look deeply into this little subconscious secret, and that's when I found out that Adam Smith was in fact in favor of slavery, and the first factories, which were being built while he was lecturing, resulted in the commodification of people, which he wrote about extensively. So to me, this was the beginning of the end in a sense. And the Capitalism and Democracy led us through around 1850s, when we get Karl Marx coming in, and then we get into the 20th century, where we have Keynes, John Maynard Keynes, Keynesian economics, leading us to the current time, where we're stuck with Milton Friedman and Alan Greenspan as some real bastions of ruthless capitalism. Thomas Piketty's Capital in the 21st Century is about the saving grace document that's floating out there today. So that's sort of encompasses that portion of it. The last board that I have is called Philosophy, and what we're doing with this is we go back to, say, it starts around 500 BC, and in 500 BC we've got Socrates and Buddha around the same time, and one is representative of the philosophy coming out of the East and the other of the West. And these are the two bedrocks of Western philosophy, Buddha and Socrates, which leads to Jesus in the West, who is then reconfigured by Paul in a really negative manner. And that's the basis of our philosophy, that we have led us through the Dark Ages up to the Age of Enlightenment, which is going to happen around 1800s over here. We're going to get the Age of Enlightenment, and we're going to look at a few things that happened in between there till we wind up in the 20th century with our state of existential angst. The latest philosopher that I'm really aware of that's prominent would be Shlomo Zizek, who's considered the most dangerous philosopher in the West. I've read him a couple of times, and I've shown you things by him in the past. He'll be prominent also. And the last board I have over here, we'll take down the philosophy, but the last board, I've shown you this pretty frequently. I ought to do a better version of it, but it's the spiritual political economy, and that's the whole point of the philosophy. We have a democracy and capitalism that have been married together, and the ethical philosophy seems to have not made it into the mix. Political economy started out as a philosophy, and by the time Adam Smith sort of massaged it, he sort of massaged the ethical and moral portions out of it, which I found really disturbing, which is why what we need is a spiritual political economy, so that we can come out of the period we're in now, going through this, whatever it is we're going through right now, and come out of it into a new world, which is more of an enlightened kind of a place to be. So anyway, these are the kind of stories, and I'll do the stories, and I'll put the either philosophy or Capitalism and Democracy or 50 years or something like that to identify which one of these I'm going to be talking about. That's it for the day. Peace, patience, and persistence. Keep up the good work and do everything you can to save the democracy.